The first time the black Mercedes rolled up to the curb, 4 men in identical dark suits stepped out before the old man even opened his door. They moved like wolves, silent, practiced, eyes scanning every corner of the sleepy suburban street. One carried a steel briefcase. 2 stood 6'5" and wore earpieces. The 4th opened the rear door with white gloves. That was the morning everything changed for Mike Brennan. But let me take you back to the beginning, because if I started with the Bodyguards, you'd never understand why a 38-year-old single dad with grease under his fingernails and 2 kids to feed would cry like a child in the middle of a coffee shop when those lawyers finally said the words he never dared dream. It started with rain, not a gentle drizzle, a cold, sideways November downpour that turned the gutters into brown rivers. Mike was late, again, rushing his 8-year-old daughter Lily and 6-year-old son Noah into the old Tacoma before school. The truck coughed like it had smoked a pack overnight, but it started. Barely. As he pulled out of the driveway, he saw him. The old man stood at the bus stop 2 blocks down, soaked to the bone. No umbrella, no hat, just a thin brown coat that might have been expensive 30 years ago, now threadbare at the cuffs. He leaned heavily on a carved wooden cane, swaying slightly as another gust slapped rain across his face. Mike's foot eased off the gas. "Dad, we're gonna be late," Lily whined from the back seat. "I know, baby." 2 seconds. He rolled down the window. Rain blew in. "Sir, you okay? Bus isn't coming for 20 minutes in this mess. Can I give you a lift?" The old man blinked through wet glasses. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and for a moment Mike thought he hadn't heard. Then the stranger gave a small nod and shuffled toward the truck. Mike jumped out, hopped the passenger door, and helped him in. The man smelled like wet wool and something faintly medicinal. "Thank you," the old man rasped. Voice like gravel dragged over velvet. "Most people, they just drive past." Mike waved it off. "Not raised that way. Where you headed?" "Street. Mary's Clinic. Maple and 12th. That's clear across town. Hop in." The kid stared wide-eyed as the stranger folded himself into the front seat. Noah whispered loudly, "Daddy, he looks like Gandalf but sad." Mike shot him a look, but the old man actually chuckled. Dry, surprised, like laughter was a muscle he'd forgotten he owned. Every morning after that, Mike looked for him. Some days the old man was already there, cane tapping the sidewalk. Some days Mike circled the block twice just to be sure. He never asked the man's name. The stranger never offered it. They fell into an unspoken rhythm. Mike would pull over. The old man would climb in slowly, always thanking him too many times. Mike would crank the heat, pass over the extra travel mug of coffee he started brewing every morning, just in case. They didn't talk much at first. Mike was bone tired. He worked swing shifts at the auto shop, 7 p.m. to 5 a.m., so he could be home when the kids woke up. Sleep came in snatches. His wife, Sarah, had died 3 years earlier in a wreck on I-95. Black ice. State trooper at the door at 2:14 a.m. He still remembered the exact minute because he'd glanced at the clock when the doorbell rang. Since then, it had been him and the kids against the world. Bills stacked higher than the laundry. The house needed a new roof. Lily's asthma inhalers cost more than the grocery bill some weeks. But every morning, no matter how little sleep he'd stolen, Mike looked for the old man. Maybe because helping someone else made the mornings feel less lonely. One February morning, ice blazed the roads. Mike's truck slid twice just getting out of the driveway. The kids were bundled like marshmallows in the back. He almost talked himself out of the detour. Then he saw the old man crumpled on the sidewalk. Mike slammed the brakes, threw the truck in park, and ran. "Sir, hey, can you hear me?" The old man was conscious but pale as death, lips tinged blue. He'd slipped on the ice. His ankle was already swelling inside his shoe. "I'm fine," he lied through chattering teeth. "You're not fine. Come on." Mike half carried him to the truck, got him buckled, blasted the heat. "Street, Mary's?" Mike asked. A pause. Then, quietly, "No. Not today. Just take me home, if you would." Mike waited. 1427 Sycamore Lane, the old man said. Mike knew the address. Everyone in town did. The Hawthorne estate, 20 acres surrounded by stone walls and iron gates. Locals called it the castle. No one had lived there for decades, or so people thought. The gates were open. Mike drove up the winding driveway, past overgrown rose gardens and a frozen fountain with a cracked marble angel. The house loomed. 3 stories, Gothic windows, ivy choking the brick. He pulled under the porte-cochere. "I can walk," the old man insisted. "You absolutely cannot." Mike came around, offered his arm. The old man took it. Together they climbed the wide stone steps. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman in her 60s, gray hair in a severe bun, stood there in a nurse's scrubs. Her eyes went wide. "Mr. Hawthorne, what happened?" "So that was the name. I fell, Margaret. This young man was kind enough to bring me home." Margaret took over, helping him inside. She glanced at Mike with something between suspicion and gratitude. Mike shifted awkwardly. I've got my kids in the truck. I should." Mr. Hawthorne turned. "Please, come in. Just for a minute. Warm up. You must be frozen." Mike hesitated. Lily and Noah were watching through the windshield like this was the most exciting morning of their lives. 2 minutes, Mike said. The foyer was the size of his entire downstairs. A chandelier the size of his truck glittered above a grand staircase. It smelled like lemon polish and old money. Margaret disappeared with Mr. Hawthorne up the stairs. Mike stood dripping on a rug that probably cost more than his annual salary. A moment later, she returned. "He'd like to see you in the study. I'll watch your children." Mike found Mr. Hawthorne in a leather wingback by roaring fire, ankle propped on an ottoman, a blanket over his lap. He looked smaller in the huge room. "Sit," the old man said, gesturing to the opposite chair. Mike sat. "I owe you more than thanks, Mr. Hawthorne began. You've been picking me up every morning for months." "Why?" Mike shrugged, embarrassed. "Seemed like the right thing. My mom always said if you've got the ability to help, you've got the obligation." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Mike swallowed. "She's gone now." Mr. Hawthorne studied him for a long moment. "And your wife?" Mike's throat closed. He managed a nod. "I'm sorry," the old man said softly. "I know that particular flavor of alone." Silence settled, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Mr. Hawthorne said, "May I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Are you managing? Financially, I mean, raising 2 children alone, it can't be easy." Mike laughed, a bitter sound. "We're hanging on by a thread that's unraveling fast. But we're hanging." Mr. Hawthorne nodded slowly. "Good. That's good." Mike stood. "I really should get the kids to school." "Of course." The old man reached for his cane, then stopped. "Would you do something for me?" "Name it." "Come back tomorrow. Same time. I have a proposition." Mike's brow creased. "A proposition?" Mr. Hawthorne smiled. Small, tired, but real. "Nothing nefarious, I promise. Just come." Mike came. For the next 4 months, the routine changed. Instead of the bus stop, Mike drove straight to the Hawthorne estate. Mr. Hawthorne, Edward, he finally allowed, would be waiting on the front steps with Margaret hovering nearby. Some days they just drove around town while Edward ran errands. Some days they sat in the study and talked. Mike learned pieces of the old man's story. Edward Hawthorne had built one of the largest pharmaceutical companies on the East Coast. Married once. A daughter, Elizabeth, who died of leukemia at age 7. His wife couldn't survive the grief. She followed 2 years later. Edward threw himself into work. Made billions. Lost every friend along the way. No siblings. No heirs. Edward saw Ed one afternoon, staring into the fire, the last leaf on a very dead tree. Mike didn't know what to say to that. In return, Mike told him about Sarah, how she used to dance in the kitchen while making pancakes, how Noah had her laugh, how Lily drew pictures of her mommy in heaven with wings made of rainbows. Edward listened like a man dying of thirst who'd just been handed water. Spring arrived. The estate's gardens exploded with color. Edward's ankle healed, but he still waited every morning for Mike's battered Tacoma. One June morning, Edward asked Mike to drive him to the cemetery. They stood before 3 headstones. Eleanor Hawthorne, beloved wife. Elizabeth Marie Hawthorne, our angel. And an empty plot with Edward's name already carved, waiting. Edward laid flowers, white lilies for his wife, pink roses for his little girl. Mike kept a respectful distance. When Edward returned to the truck, his eyes were red but dry. "I've made a decision," he said quietly. Mike waited. "I'm going to sell the company. The buyer's close in 3 weeks. After that, I won't need all this." He gestured vaguely at the estate, the grounds, the life he'd built. Mike frowned. "What will you do?" Edward looked at him. "I was hoping you could help me figure that out." Mike laughed nervously. "Edward, I fix transmissions for a living. I'm not exactly qualified for." "You're qualified for the only thing that matters," Edward interrupted. "You have a heart that still works. Mine stopped a long time ago. I'd like to borrow yours for a while." That was the first time Edward asked Mike to call him by his first name. Summer blurred past. Edward started coming to nose T-ball games, sitting in a folding chair with a Panthers cap pulled low, clapping louder than any of the parents when Noah managed to hit the ball off the tee. He sat in the bleachers for Lily's dance recital, eyes shining when she nailed her cartwheel. He taught the kids how to play gin rummy on the back porch and let them win exactly half the time. He paid for Lily's summer dance camp without saying a word, just handed Mike an envelope with a check and said, "Tell her it's from the Tooth Fairy." She lost 3 this year. Mike tried to refuse. Edward wouldn't hear it. Mike's friends at the shop started calling him the millionaire's chauffeur. Mike hated it. He still worked every shift, came home smelling like motor oil, collapsed into bed with Noah curled against one side and Lily on the other. But things were easier. The roof got fixed. The truck got new tires. Lily's inhalers stopped being a monthly crisis. Then came the morning in early October. Mike pulled up at 7:45 as always. But the front doors were already open. Margaret stood on the steps looking pale. Inside, the foyer was filled with strangers in suits. 4 massive bodyguards in tactical jackets stood at parade rest. A woman in a charcoal skirt suit held a thick folder. 2 men with briefcases flanked her. Edward sat in his wingback chair in the study, dressed in a 3-piece suit Mike had never seen. He looked 20 years younger, and terrified. Mike's stomach dropped. "Edward, what's going on?" The woman in the suit stepped forward. "Michael Brennan." He nodded numbly. "My name is Claudia Reynolds. I represent the Hawthorne Family Trust." She gestured to the men. "These gentlemen are here for security, given the size of the estate transfer we're executing today." Mike's knees went weak. "Estate transfer." Edward raised a hand. "Claudia, give us the room please." The lawyers hesitated. The bodyguards didn't move until Claudia nodded. When the door closed, Edward looked at Mike with wet eyes. "I'm dying, Mike." The words hit like a fist. "Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. They found it 3 weeks ago. I have months, maybe less." Mike couldn't breathe. "I didn't tell you because I'm a coward," Edward continued, voice shaking. "I didn't want it to be about pity. These last 10 months with you and the children, they're the only purely happy days I've had in 53 years. Mike found his voice. "There's treatment, clinical trials." Edward shook his head. "I've lived long enough. I'm tired, and for the first time, I'm not afraid to go, because I won't be alone anymore." He reached for a thick envelope on the side table and held it out. Mike didn't take it. Inside, "Edward Said, is my last will and testament. Signed yesterday. Witnessed. Ironclad." Mike stared. "You, Michael Brennan, are the sole heir to my entire estate. The house, the investments, the liquid assets, everything, valued at just over $840 million after taxes." The room spun. "There's more," Edward Said softly. "I've established trusts for Lily and Noah, enough that they'll never want for anything. College, weddings, whatever they dream. And a separate foundation in Sarah's name for pediatric cancer research. Because I couldn't save my Elizabeth, but maybe we can save someone else's." Mike sank into the opposite chair, head in his hands. "This is insane. People will fight this. Your company. Shareholders. Let them try," Edward Said fiercely. "Claudia is the best estate attorney on the eastern seaboard. Every I is dotted, every T crossed a dozen times. There are no living relatives. No one withstanding. It's done." Mike looked up, tears streaming. "Why me?" Edward leaned forward, gripping Mike's hand with surprising strength. "Because you saw an old man freezing at a bus stop, and you stopped. Not for money. Not for recognition. You stopped because that's who you are. You gave me a family when I had none left to give. The least I can do is give you the security you and those babies deserve." Mike sobbed. Ugly, open-mouthed sobs that shook his whole body. Edward cried too. Later, minutes or hours, Mike couldn't tell, the lawyers came back in. Claudia laid documents on the desk. Mike signed where she pointed, fingers trembling. When it was over, she handed him a small velvet box. "Mr. Hawthorne asked me to give you this separately." Inside was a simple gold wedding band. Sarah's. Mike looked at Edward, confused. "I had it cleaned," Edward sighed. "I thought, maybe you'd want to give it to someone someday, when you're ready. Or keep it for Lily. But it should stay in the family. Your family." That was the moment Mike broke completely. He fell to his knees in front of Edward's chair and wrapped his arms around the old man like a child. "Thank you," he whispered over and over. "Thank you for choosing us." Edward held him tightly, stroking his hair the way Mike imagined a father would. "No, son," Edward whispered back. "Thank you for choosing me." Edward lived another 9 weeks. He spent them in the little house on Elm Street with Mike and the kids, not the mansion. He wanted to fall asleep to no snoring through the wall and wake up to Lily's off-key singing in the shower. He died on a Tuesday morning in December, snow falling soft and thick outside the window. Mike was holding one hand, Lily the other. Noah sat on the bed playing quietly with the old carved cane Edward had taught him to whittle with. Edward opened his eyes one last time. "Look at me," he said, voice barely a breath. "Surrounded by love. Who gets to say that?" Then he smiled, the biggest, brightest smile Mike had ever seen on his face, and slipped away. At the funeral, 500 people showed up. Old employees, distant cousins who came out of the woodwork hoping for scraps, reporters, curiosity seekers. But in the front row sat Mike, Lily, and Noah. And when the minister asked if anyone wanted to speak, Mike stood. He told the story of the rain, of the bus stop, of pancakes and t-ball games and gin rummy on the porch. He told them about the morning the lawyers walked in with 4 bodyguards. And he told them the most important part. Edward Hawthorne wasn't a billionaire when he died. He was a dad. He was a grandpa. He was my family. And he taught me the truest thing I'll ever know, that wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in mornings you get to pick someone up when they've fallen. In hands you hold when the road gets too hard. In choosing, every single day, to love people just because they're there. Mike looked out at the crowd, tears falling freely. So if you want to honor Edward Hawthorne's life, don't build a statue. Don't name a building after him. Just look for someone standing in the rain, and stop. He stepped down. Lily and Noah met him at the pew, wrapping their little arms around him. And somewhere, Mike knew, Edward was smiling. 3 years later, the Hawthorne Foundation has funded cancer trials in 14 countries. Sarah's name is on hospital wings and research centers from Boston to Los Angeles. The mansion is now a home for foster kids aging out of the system, dozens of them running through gardens that bloom brighter than ever. And every single morning, no matter the weather, Mike Brennan still drives the old Tacoma. He kept it down to the corner of Maple and 12th. There's a new bus stop bench there now, with a bronze plaque. In memory of Edward Hawthorne, who taught us that kindness is the only investment that never fails. Mike parks, gets out, and waits. Because some mornings there's a teenager with a backpack and nowhere to go. Some mornings an exhausted mom with a stroller and 3 kids. Some mornings just someone who looks like they could use a coffee and a ride. And every time, Mike opens the passenger door and says the same thing Edward taught him. "Rough morning. Hop in. Heat's on. I made extra coffee." Then he smiles, puts the truck in drive, and heads toward whatever the day holds, knowing the richest man he ever knew left him the greatest fortune imaginable. A heart that remembers what it feels like to be seen, and the courage to keep looking for people who still need to be.